Good morning, Year 3, and welcome to another week of literacy. We did some super writing before half term. We did lots of stories, and all the stuff we did was to do with World War II. Well, it's a new start of a new half term, so we've got some new things to do in literacy. This week, we're going to have a whole week where we're looking at poetry. Start of the week today, and tomorrow we're going to have a look at poems and discuss poems and our response to them, and then we're going to plan and write our own poem based on one I'm going to share with you on Wednesday, and you're going to write it by the end of the week. So a mixture of things all to do with poetry this week. Now, poetry is quite a hard thing to say. If I said to you, what is a poem, you might find it a bit tricky to explain. So we're going to start today with a PowerPoint that's hopefully going to make it clear about what poetry is. So bear with me while I do my sharing. Poetry. What is poetry? Well, I've found a quote on Britannica.com, and this is what Britannica.com said poetry was. I'm not saying that really cheaply. Poetry is literature that evokes a concentrated imaginative awareness of experience or a specific emotional response through language chosen and arranged for its meaning, sound, and rhythm. There's some big words in there. I'm not sure I even know what exactly all those words mean, but I'm going to try and unpick some of the ones tricky, and then I'm going to read my own version, which is written next to it. So poetry, literature, that's writing. So poetry is a type of writing that evokes, that means makes you imagine something, concentrated awareness, or have an emotional response, that means feel something, whether you like it or not, or makes you feel scared, or makes you feel angry, or makes you feel happy. Through the language that's chosen, so the words that the poet has used and arranged, just the right words, the meaning, and sometimes it's the sound and the rhythm. So if I make that sound easier, I've written my own slightly. So it's writing that paints a picture to make you imagine something or feel something. The poet wants you to have a response to the poem. They want you to see what they see, or think about things in the way that they did, perhaps in a way that you've not thought about them before, because the poet's chosen just the right words to get that idea across. So poems are all very different, but some might paint that picture, and some might be about making you feel something or think about something in a different way. So poetry, the definition of poetry is quite tricky, but I hope that sort of clears it up a little. So let's move on to the next slide. So I did just say this, didn't I? No two poems are the same. They don't follow the same recipe, but they've all got the same mixture of things that are really important, the ingredients into a poem. So before I share the next slides, I wonder if we were in class and I said to you, well, what can you tell me about poems? What things would you expect to see in poems? I wonder what you can remember from the poetry work we've done in the past. So pause the video here before I start sharing all the ingredients and see how many you can remember. What things would you expect to see in a poem? I take it you've on pause now. Okay, so let's see if you came up with any of the things that are on the next slide. I'm guessing that the first thing you came up with, most of you would say poems rhyme. Well, some poetry does rhyme, but lots of poems don't actually rhyme at all. And in fact, writing rhyming poetry is really tricky. So the poem we're going to write this week isn't even going to be a rhyming poem. But rhyme is definitely one of the things that we could spot in a poem. Let's have a look on the other list of this list and see some of the other things you picked. So wow words, really well chosen words. A poem doesn't have to be super long, it just has to be just the right words that you've really thought about. The word here called alliteration. I wonder if you can remember what that is, but we're going to come to that on a slide shortly. These things called similes. I know some of you use those in your story writing. Something else called metaphors. We've got repetition, that means saying the same things, using the same lines for effect, rhythm, and structure, that means how the poem's laid out. So as we go through the remaining slides, we'll look at each of those in a bit of detail. So, rhyming. Lots of poems rhyme. Poetry is written in a metrical form that rhymes throughout. This is a rhymed verse. So let's share this bit together. I hear the people sing to the glory of the king. He sits upon his great big chair to watch everybody just sit and stare. And so we've got a rhyming pattern. We've got the first line, sing, rhymes with, which word rhymes with sing? King, correct. So the first and the second line both rhyme. And the third and the fourth also rhyme. And so this has got a pattern that's got the first and second is called A, and then the next one's called A because it rhymes with A. And then we've got a different sound which is B, and the one after rhymes with that one. So we've got an A, B, B rhyme pattern for this poem. When poems rhyme, they don't always necessarily rhyme with two lines together. That's called a rhyming couplet, when a couple means two lines go together. Some poems, the rhyming pattern will be different. So lots of poems have rhyming. Let's wonder what comes next. Now, this page here explains how poems are split into sections. And when we've got a song where we have a section of writing and it's a section of words and we keep coming back to the same words, that's called a verse. That's the same in a poem. Two lines would be known as a couplet. And this poem, a stanza is a group of lines gathered together because they've got a rhythmical pattern. A stanza with four more lines can be referred to as a verse. So you've got 4 lines apparently. I didn't know that until I've just read this, to be called a verse. So the length of the pattern of a stanza decides what type of poem it is. Stanzas are made by leaving a blank space before and after it. So some poems will have lots of blank lines in between. There's lots of verses. Other poems might not have a gap at all. A certain section of the poem might be repeated, almost like a chorus in a song. I called that a verse, didn't I, a moment ago? A chorus is what we have in a song where we keep coming back to the same bit. The verses are different, and the chorus is the bit that we repeat. It's very similar with poetry. So we could talk about how many verses we can see by counting the missing lines and the sections in a poem. So we've got 2 bits of this poem. Let's have a read. I love to dance. I love to prance. What my heart would do but be sad and blue if I could not dance. Dancing feels nice, but it comes at a price. Dancing to twos and shoes, my gosh, you can't lose. Another thing with poetry is the number of lines in verses can vary. How many lines were in the first verse or first stanza? 5, the second one had 4. You can pretty much break lots of rules when you're writing a poem because it's up to you how you want to lay it out. One rule that does get broken lots in poetry, and you can see it here, is that each line tends to start with a capital letter. If you were doing a story and you put a capital letter at the start of each line, I'd be like, the capital letters go where the full stops go. After a full stop, you need the capital letter. Why do you put capital letters at the start of each line? Poetry, you can tend to have a capital letter at the start of each line. Or I've seen poems where there's no capital letters in it at all because you're being personal with the decisions you've made and how you're writing it. Let's look at the next thing. Repetition. That's where in a poem you get the same words repeated, but there's different ways it can be done. Repetition is used in poetry to sometimes make it more interesting, sometimes to make those words stand out because you want them to be heard several times because they're important. That would be called a refrain. So a line in a poem that gets said maybe at the start, halfway through, and the same line at the end would be a refrain. Sometimes we've already talked about this a moment ago, you might get a chorus in a poem. So there's a whole chunk, like in a song, that gets repeated. And sometimes in an echo poem, the last word of each line could be repeated as a response in the next line. So we've got repetition as well. Alliteration, that's one I said we'd come back and talk about. Alliteration is when the author, or the poet in this case, deliberately chooses words that start with the same sound for effect. It can be used to create a greater or more interesting description of different things, people, and objects. So, for example, Sally sells seashells by the seashore. Now that one's a bit of a tongue twister. But you don't have to have that many words with the same letter, the same sound to count as alliteration. Teresa tripped and tumbled tremendously over the tree. That sounds more like a line from the story, but when we see alliteration in a poem, it might just be 3 adjectives. The cute cat, again, curled on a cushion. There you go, 4 cute cat curled on a cushion. Just came up with that. So, alliteration. Now, the next last 2. Similes are often used in poems as well. A simile is where you compare something to something else, but you say it's like something else or as something else. So, for example, as busy as a bee, because bees are quite busy. When you see a bee and they're buzzing around, they're more like they're too busy to stop. So someone who's described as busy, you could say they were busy as a bee, using that word as to join the ideas together. You're not saying the person is a bee, you're saying they're busy as a bee. So it's that busyness that you're comparing. Or runs like a cheetah. Does that mean they've got spotty legs? No, it just means, what do we know about cheetahs? Yeah, cheetahs are very fast. They're the fastest land animal in actual fact. So they're not saying they're as fast as a cheetah, but they're saying they run very quickly. So rather than saying, and they run very quickly, they're comparing them using something called a simile. As white as a ghost. If someone is white as a ghost, it's all the colours dropped from their face because you're saying they're really pale. A different way of saying somebody was pale, a different way of saying somebody was busy, or a different way of saying somebody was fast. So we use similes sometimes in story writing, not too often, because too many similes in a story doesn't gets a bit confusing. It doesn't sound quite right, but it's a nice thing to drop in. But similes are often used in poetry. Something that's very similar to similes is the next one, which you've maybe not heard of before, which is metaphor. It's very similar. I should use the word similar because that's for similar, but instead of saying something is like something else, you say something is something else. So instead, her eyes didn't glisten like diamonds or like glistening jewels. You're saying her eyes were glistening jewels. The kids at school are all brains. He is my knight in shining armour, and the world is a stage. All those are making metaphors about him. When we're saying her eyes were glistening jewels, they're not really, but they are like jewels in the way that they shine or maybe look very bright or colourful. So to add extra emphasis, instead of saying they're like, we've even dropped the like to saying they are. Her eyes are glistening jewels. The kids at school are all brains. That just means they're all very clever. We're not all brains. I've got hands, arms, legs, but there's all different parts of me. But a metaphor. If someone's a knight in shining armour, it doesn't mean he's riding on a horse like that in that picture. It means that they've come to the rescue. So metaphors can be a bit tricky to read, but they're very similar to similes. It's just instead of saying like or as, we're saying that they are. In this case, the verb are doesn't actually appear. It says were and is, but it's the verb to be. Right, so we've had all those different things. We've had rhyme, looking at the verses. We've had looking at alliteration. We've looked at similes and metaphors. And all those things, when you look at a poem, they won't all be in every poem, because it would be amazing if they were all in one poem. Different poems use different parts of the ingredients, like we said. So we're going to have a look now and share 3 poems. They're all about winter, as we're still in the middle of winter. And you've had lots of winter experience this year. You've been very lucky to get out in the snow and all the winter fun and stuff. So we're going to look at some winter poems together. I'm going to read them first, all 3 to you. And then I want you to have a discussion with the adult who's probably helping you at home and think about which of these different things that we've talked about with poetry you can actually see in each of those poems. First time you read the poems, it's just nice to say which one you liked, which one, what emotional response, or what did you imagine, those things that I said that a poet wants you to do when you read that short piece of writing. They've chosen those well carefully because they want you to feel it. a certain way or think about things in the way that they suggested. So let's share the poem. I'm just going to have to stop sharing this and share a different document. All being well. There we go. Right. Oops. So we've got three poems to share. This first one's called A 4-Year-Old's Winter Lament. It's written from the viewpoint of a 4-year-old who's lamenting. That means they're not happy about something. So let's share this one. I find it unfair that I've had my share of weather that's windy and blows, but I must take exception that I'm in reception and I can't describe when it snows. From one dinner time when my brother, year 9, revealed to me that years ago the joys he'd once had with my mum and my dad, which all were concerning snow. He carried on talking and told me of walking to the highest hills in the town. It was there that he slid on his sledge with his kid from the top and then all the way down. He continued with cheer to tell me how near they had to a week out of school. The gates remained bolted, education was halted, snow fun was their only rule. He told of delights of long snowball fights. The snow walls turned all their lips blue. Their fingers all burned, and oh, how I yearned to get hit on the head by one too. He showed me a snap of a man in a cap, not a real one, but one made of snow. It was really quite clear that I'll never come near to building a snowman, I know. What makes it so sad is I wanted so bad to have one day of fun in the snow before I get older and winter feels colder, but those days I might never know. I wonder whether you like that one or not, or what it made you think about. I'm going to come back to these poems after you've had some time to think about whether you can see rhyme or how many verses, whether there was any similes. Did you see alliteration? And the other things we talked about earlier. I'm going to share another poem next. This one's called A Recipe for Winter. You will need a long stripy scarf, a cozy coat, a pair of waterproof boots. First, gather 3 snowballs with fluffy mittens. Next, add a spider web glinting with frost. Sprinkle in feathers from robin's red breast, and swirl in magical morning mist. Season with twigs from a hedgehog's bed. Add a pinch of holly, a sprig of ivy. Pour in hot chocolate and gooey marshmallows. Then warm gently over a crackling fire. Though trees stand bare, though winds bluster and blow, your winter will glitter with sparkling snow. I wonder why that one might be called A Recipe for Winter. Perhaps when you're having a look for how many verses, and there might be something else you might talk about with this particular poem, and whether it rhymes or not, or whether there's any alliteration in this one. Have a close look, and there might be. And we'll share the third poem. Okay, this one is called Snowflake. There might be some tricky words in here, so concentrate. 6-sided symmetry, dendrite, hexagonal plate, like fingertips, unique, soft, seemingly weightless, crystal clear coldness, frozen, frosted, fragile, a moment of beauty before it melts away, gone, perhaps forever. Well, so there you have 3 very different poems, and each poem will have some will have alliteration in, some will have rhyme, some will have more verses, some might be one verse, So I'd like you to look at all 3 poems and have a chat and see what you think of each poem. I'm going to ask you to pause it while you do that. You can do it from on the screen. You don't necessarily need to print these off today. And then I'm going to come back and hopefully some of the things I say you may have decided having read those poems for yourself. So pause it and I'm going to come back to each one. Okay, we might as well start with this one as it's still on my screen. Excuse me a second. What did you spot with this poem? How many verses does it look like it's got? Yeah, it's only got 1 verse, hasn't it? Did this poem rhyme? There's no rhyme in it either. I wonder what things you did manage to spot in here. I quite like this poem. I don't know which was your favourite. Because this one, the poet has gone through a lot of detail to try and describe a snowflake, choosing some words really carefully. 6-sided symmetry, because a snowflake, it would appear from the illustrations, does have six lots of symmetry sometimes, and that's got alliteration, hasn't it? 6-sided symmetry. I think he's done that for effect. Hexagonal plates. Ooh, how many sides does a hexagon have? It's got 6 as well, hasn't it? Because the X in hex and the X in 6, that's how I remember. So they're describing their shape again. They're flat like a plate, like fingerprints, unique. Do you know what that word unique means? It means it's there's only one of it, one of a kind. And everybody's fingerprints are meant to be different. So each snowflake, they've all grown out of ice and they're all slightly different. Soft, seemingly weightless. I wonder what that means. What does weightless mean? It doesn't weigh anything. They must weigh something. How heavy do you think a snowflake might be? Not very heavy at all. If you had a snowflake resting on your hand, I bet you wouldn't be able to feel it, which is why they said seemingly weightless. Now we've got a bit more alliteration. Crystal, clear, coldness, frozen, frosted, fragile. I bet fragile's maybe one of the words. What does fragile mean? When we look at poetry, we often talk about the language that's in it. It's breakable, isn't it? It can break easily. And that snowflake is very fragile, tiny little bits of ice, you can break it easily. A moment of beauty before it melts away. Gone, perhaps forever. And they're saying, I think the poet with this one wanted you to think about how beautiful snowflake was and how delicate and how it doesn't last very long, does it? It's very beautiful, but once it melts, it is gone. And I'm not sure it's perhaps forever. I think it is forever, isn't it? You can't, even if you got the water and froze it again, it wouldn't turn back into a snowflake. They're made in the clouds, all different. I quite like that one. So did you spot the alliteration? Did you say it had no rhyme? But hopefully you talked about some of those words as well when you're discussing what the words actually meant in that poem. Let's go back. What did you have to say about a recipe for winter? What was the special thing you noticed about this? Yeah, it's written like a recipe. It said poets can break the rules and make anything. Come up with lots of different ideas. So winter isn't something you cook in the kitchen, but they've written it as if it is. So they've written some ingredients at the top, what you need to make your winter: a long stripy scarf, a cozy coat, a pair of waterproof boots. You definitely need those if it's a winter, don't you? Keep warm. So they're what you need. And they've put some things in that you find inside winter. And they've written it like a set of instructions as well, with the first and the next. We've done instruction writing, haven't we, this year? And then pour all those bossy verbs at the start of the line, and sprinkle, season, warm, and all the things from within it. Robin redbreast, magical morning mist. You spot a little bit of alliteration in there. I did, but there's no rhyme. Is that not there? Well, maybe there is. Should we read the last bit? Though trees stand bare, though winds bluster and blow, your winter will glitter with sparkling snow. For most of the poem doesn't rhyme. It's not rhyming, so there isn't a rhyming pattern. They've managed to make these end bits with below and snow rhyme. There's a bit more of alliteration down here, bluster and below, to describe how the wind works in winter. Do you like that one? I wonder which your favourite's been. And then the first poem that we shared, 4-year-old's Winter Lament. This one, hopefully you counted the verses. So it's got 1, 2, 3, 4. Ooh, can't count properly. It's moving 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. This one's almost like a story, isn't it? It's not about think about a snowflake. Well, it's not a clever idea about let's describe winter as a recipe and all the things that in it that we would put into a winter's day. This is sharing somebody's feelings. This is the words of the 4-year-old. What are they upset about? What are they not happy about? Yeah, they're not happy that they don't really know what snow is like. This year, you've been very lucky to have lots of snow. When I was a reception teacher, I used to spot this in children quite often. They'd get to reception, and if we'd had a couple of winters without any snow, when it snowed and you were in reception, you were like, oh, it's snow, because you didn't really know what snow was about. And this child's got obviously an older brother who can say, oh, I know about snow. Oh, I've been on a sledge, I've been down the hill. And this child this is their thoughts. I'm missing the snow. I've never done that. What if it never snows again? Well, this year you've had it, but some children do go quite a long time before they can remember a snowy day. So this one's more of an idea for you to think about. And I wonder if you ever felt like that, you know, all this stuff we do at school and we talk about snowing all the time, and you couldn't really remember what snow was like. Well, we've had a top up this year. It's been a few years since we've had snow you could go and play in. This one though, I'm hoping you also commented on the rhyme. Lots of rhyme in every verse. I find it unfair that I've had my share of weather that's windy and blows, but I must take exception that I'm in reception. I can't describe when it snows. So there's 6 lines, so let's look. That's line A. That rhymes with that, so it's A, and then this is another sound, so we're going to call this B. So it's A, B. Does this rhyme with B? No, this is another sound, so it's A, B, C. This rhymes with C, so it's C, C. And then this one rhymes with B, so this is actually an A, B, C, C, B. There's unfair and share rhyme, blows and snows rhyme, exception and reception. I wonder if it follows in every verse. Should we just check another one? We'll do this one. Talking and walking, town and down, slid and kid. You can imagine it's quite tricky writing rhyme with poetry. Not only have you got to come up with the right words to share your ideas, but you've got to make them rhyme as well. This is why writing poetry isn't necessarily about writing a long page. It can take a while to get all the right words and get them to rhyme and in the right order. So the poetry we're doing this week, we're not going to try and rhyme. It usually ends in disaster with people rhyming things, and they put the word orange, and then they go, I can't rhyme with orange. Well, don't choose for it, orange. Okay. So we have looked at 3 poems today. Hopefully you had a good chat and think about the different types of things we expect to see in a poem. And there was no written word today for some of you. So tomorrow we're going to look at 2 particular poems, and we're going to try and think about what the poet was thinking and how the poet described it. It's going to be a bit like a guided reading session tomorrow, but you are going to write some ideas down on a sheet. So I will see you again for some more poetry tomorrow. You know, I might stop the share and come back. There you go. I'll do a proper big bye. See you tomorrow, guys.